In this episode today, we'll talk about who we are at Eblana Learning, the work that we do, and why we've joined you today.
But one thing that every person asked us was, where does the name Eblana come from? So Rita, can you tell me a little bit more about that? What kind of school leader even has the time of day to keep up with all the research? Because you've been busy 5 or 6 hours minimum per day for the last year and a half. Tools are only 10% of this conversation to be had. We need to be talking about ethics. We need to be talking about use. We need to be talking about safety, safe use. Welcome to the AI in IB Schools podcast, strategic leadership conversations for the tech revolution. I'm Rachel Bodley, and alongside my co-host, Rita Bateson, who is a former IB curriculum manager and a founding head of an IB Continuum school in Dublin. We're excited to have you join us as we chat with school leaders from around the IB world, uncovering their best practices, innovative approaches, and real-life stories of AI integration.
In this episode today, we'll talk about who we are at Eblana Learning, the work that we do, and why we've joined you today.
Okay, Rita, let's get started. Let's tell everyone about our story. How did we first meet, and what drew us to wanting to work together?
I suppose it started late 2023, which is roughly when ChatGPT was exploding onto the scene for educators and for schools. And from my perspective, I've been working as a consultant with schools and with organizations. And I believe that you reached out to me on LinkedIn initially, but you can probably take it from there. But we've been working together now for almost a year and a half in one form or another.
Yeah, and I think for me, it was that aha moment when we realized, okay, we need to start something and we need to do something to help schools because there was so much AI chaos, right? Just this AI storm of so much information and misinformation and a million tools that you and your teachers could use. And so we decided, okay, let's come together and let's marry your IB expertise with deep AI research. You know, I love AI tools. I started utilizing them immediately, but you brought a really neutral stance to this, right? And so we wanted to marry those two things about AI and IB and bring those together in a way that really holistically supports IB schools.
I think that's what probably the funniest for me is that I started as a writer, as a textbook writer, and a curriculum writer. I started to initially with AI as a threat. I was very AI skeptical, and you've always been an AI enthusiast. And I think between us, we've managed to navigate the pathways for those people who have both feelings and who experience it very, very differently. And we've carved a very moderate, a very strategic approach to AI. And I actually like that really reflects the IBs. Other people with their differences can also be right, because we've managed to be very balanced in our approach. We do the research. We only base our claims and advice on things that have merit. But I think from my personal aha moment outside of Eblana was I went to an IB conference, an IB IPSCA conference, and in February 2023, and the people in the room were 2024 it was, and the people in the room were so anxious about what AI was going to do with assessment, what it was going to do to pedagogy. And there was genuine fear in the room. And I hadn't seen heads of school like that for a very long time. And I felt my heart went out to them. As a former head of school, I could just imagine the sleepless nights they were having. Accusations, false accusations, a panic and intrigue and everything else. They just wanted help. They wanted guidance. And the IB had come out with a certain amount of information and guidance, but they needed more. There was always going to be more questions. And nobody else was addressing it at the time. And it seemed to me that it was perfect for you and I to come together and do this for schools, to fill that gap that was desperately needed.
Absolutely. And I think too, we are trying to approach this very much with that IB lens, right? We both absolutely love the International Baccalaureate. We love the teaching that it brings to schools. We love this holistic view of education. And so being able to approach AI in the same way with a very critical eye was exciting. And I think it's brought us both to from two ends of the extreme, an AI early adopter to someone who was really nervous about adopting AI, to bringing both of us together into a very neutral space. And this is kind of the conversation that we had. We just launched our company really at the IB Global Conference in Singapore last week. It was an incredible event, and everyone was really excited about the work that we're doing. But one thing that every person asked us was, where does the name Eblana come from? So Rita, can you tell me a little bit more about that?
They did, in fact. It's such an unusual name, and it doesn't have IB featuring in there or AI. So it's something a little bit different. Eblana is the ancient Roman name for, well, it's not Roman, it's kind of pre-Roman for Dublin. And I'm, as you can hear, obviously from Dublin originally. I spent more than 20 years abroad. And when I was younger, I always wanted to call my first child Eblana. I just thought it was a beautiful name. We ended up with Ellie instead. It was a negotiation. But for me, what it symbolizes is that the Irish have always had a real dedication to knowledge and learning. And in the Middle Ages, our monks and nuns kind of populated the world with institutional educational initiatives, and they protected what was really important. During the Middle Ages, they really preserved the texts, they replicated them, they shared them widely. And thanks to that kind of commitment to education, we still have ancient scrolls of ancient Greek and other languages that have been preserved. And for me, that's what I really wanted. I wanted not to have initiative overload and churn and more churn for schools. I really wanted to preserve what was super important, what was legitimately worth knowing and that we have epistemic responsibility for, but also that we help people to innovate because they can't be left behind. Schools will inevitably struggle with this, but what will they retain? What will be really important? So for Eblana, for us, I think, and I'm sure that you agree with this, we want only what's best for our schools. We want to keep what's working. We want to bolster and foster that. And we want them to be able to innovate responsibly.
Totally.
You were very kind not to make me change the name when you came on board.
You're so funny. Yeah, and I think you said protect, and that's right. We want to protect the IB education that we love so much too, right? And those pockets of IB education that just should never go away, that we know work really well for kids and we know work well in the classroom. So I love that word protect and preserve. Yeah, and I'm excited to help schools realize that in this AI storm, as we go back to, AI storm and the AI chaos. I think another thing I wanted to share with everyone is really our partnership and how the dynamic between the two of us, because the two of us co-founded this company together, and it's only the two of us that work at the company. So we clearly are a very, very small scale startup at the moment. Hopefully, if you're listening to our podcast in a year, it'll be a different story, but we'll see where things go. But yeah, what really makes us unique at Eblana Learning is how we complement each other. So Rita, do you want to speak a little bit to that?
I do. I think what's really nice is that you're an IB educator through and through. So you know the classroom, you know people's needs, and you're very good at putting yourself into the mindset of what the day-to-day strategic needs of a teacher is, what a school needs. And then from your work at Toddle and with other companies that you founded, you have such an incredible strategic oversight. You understand what needs to happen, because left alone, I would be sitting in a corner writing frantically for the rest of my life, like an absent-minded professor. But what you really do is you help the whole company to kind of have a vision, to articulate that vision. And then you take whatever curriculum or development or online courses, whatever we develop together, you have an incredible way of scaling that up to reach as many schools as possible, to deal with as many stakeholders. And just a massive round of applause, because what you do can move mountains. It's absolutely insane, your ability. And I think that complements us, because I don't have that skill set. I don't have the business competencies. I think I'm slightly too boffiny at times. But I love that you can see the value in the curriculum, you can see the application. And a number of schools that we spoke to in Singapore and since have said, we love that you already speak IB. You're not going to give us things that don't apply to us. You're not going to talk to us in a language we don't understand. You're not going to talk down to us. In fact, that was one of the best feedbacks we have from another school, wasn't it? That they really enjoyed being spoken to at their level. And by that, they meant high level. They really wanted to be engaged as a fellow professional. And I thought that was really insightful, that's what we can do differently.
Well, I didn't expect you to brag about me for a minute. So yeah, I think the way that we complement each other, I am really deeply motivated by strategy, by growing a business. And I love it. I absolutely love it. And you don't have that. That's absolutely right. But what I was always missing was that counterpart and the pedagogical side of things, right? How those two fit together is really unique. Yeah. And I just, again, back to that pedagogical point of, I don't have those strengths, right? Of course I can write my own curriculum, and I did that. And I guess I could, but I'm not as passionate about it. And that's something you are so eagerly passionate about. You've written so many textbooks, you've got publishers knocking at your door, you've got emails from publishers every time you open your inbox, because you're an incredibly sound writer. And I think that's that content piece that I never had, or I always needed. So that was you were always my missing piece to my puzzle.
Oh, that's right, loving. Well, I think that's probably a good time then to stop our mutual loving and think about what it is that we're doing at Eblana Learning. So we've come together, this incredible team. We have the tech, we have the business, and then we have the curriculum and expertise. Can you tell us a little bit about what exactly we're doing and how it's going to help IB schools?
Yeah, so we started doing just a lot of consulting and working in schools. Rita, you used to consult in IB curriculum in schools. So you've done a lot of work in that space, schools all around the globe, all of the regions in the world. And you've done some incredible work, usually with math and science, but also with leadership teams and that kind of thing and vertical alignment of curriculum. But what we wanted to do was, again, going back to this AI research, what kind of school leader even has the time of day to keep up with all the research? Because you've been busy 5 or 6 hours minimum per day for the last year and a half. So who in their right mind could actually do all this research? So we packaged it into, first we were going into schools and doing this work with leadership teams, with teachers, and really upskilling everyone. So making sure that everyone has the knowledge base of ethical AI use, of what tools are out there. How is this impacting assessment? What does it look like in our classrooms? And that kind of learning. And then also working with leadership teams too, to say, well, where are we going as a school? What is our AI strategy? What about the policies? We need to revamp these. We need to redevelop them. And we actually need to look at every policy that we have in our schools that exist. So we were doing all that work with leadership teams and teachers, and also having the opportunity to do this same kind of learning with parents and students and even governors and PTAs and stuff like that in schools. So we were doing all of that in consulting. We were doing it in person, face to face, but we were also doing it live. And then we looked at each other and thought, how can we reach more schools and how can we help more schools? Because there were so many schools coming to us. I know that you've had some Irish public schools come to you, some of the public school systems, different IB schools around the world are coming to us, and we don't have the time, right? So how can we make this content available to more schools and more teachers around the world? And so that's when we decided, let's take all of the courses and the professional development that you've written and let's put them online into course bundles. So now we've created AI certified educator course bundle for level 1, level 2, and level 3. And then we have a couple course bundles for AI certified leaders. So that's an essentials bundle and a transformative AI certified leader. And then we also have a really cool package for a role that doesn't yet exist at your school, but probably should. And that's the AI certified school officer. And maybe Rita, you can speak a little bit more to that AI officer role and why you think A, it's a role we need, and B, kind of a little bit about what that course entails and the work you've been doing in that area.
Sure. I think anyone who's survived the GDPR onslaught of the past will remember that feeling that there were sudden expectations and financial imperatives to get it done. And yet we didn't know how it applied to schools, and we panicked and we received an absolute deluge of things from companies and disclaimers and cookies and you name it. And one of the things that we see coming through in different regulations and in different jurisdictions of schools and of education is that there will be an expectation for data privacy. There will be a protection of citizens' rights. There's going to be tons of things coming down the track. We don't know what that looks like yet. And loath as I am to say to schools, you need another responsibility for someone, because that's always hard to find the capacity. But this will be crucial. I think in terms of the vision, we look to the leaders and we look to the school management. But in terms of implementation and risk management, leaders don't have time for that. And they certainly don't have a technical competence for that. So we see the future developing in such a way that when we had a GDPR officer or a safeguarding officer, these roles were new but necessary. They were really, really crucial. And with AI being so significant and so disruptive, and invading in such a way into our classrooms and into our kids' lives, that it's really important that someone is a single point of contact and is maintaining that knowledge base, is scanning the horizon for what's coming next. And again, they may not have time for that. So what we can do is we can train those AI officers or aspiring AI leaders, whatever that might be in your school, how it looks, whether it's a tech leader who needs to upskill, whether it's a middle manager who you want to reskill. The idea of this is that you have someone who is not building a kingdom and who's not vaunting their own expertise. They're there to serve the needs of the school, maybe the technological needs, but more importantly, probably the legal, the risk management side of school, the encouragement of staff, the protection of students. It's a really vital role. It may not be a full-time role. It certainly won't be in most schools, but it's a full-time responsibility. And that's really crucial. So if rather than give somebody this role and a blank slate and an expectation that they spend their summer researching everything about AI, maybe we can accelerate that process. We can give you all of the certifications. So we've completed our ISO certifications and we're already up to date on the EU AI Act and certified. So when we visit a school or when we engage in online courses, we have the backup knowledge that we know that this is significant. This is what matters. And an AI officer in a school will provide that key function. They're not the only one responsible or accountable. There are other people who need to be consulted and informed. It is a whole school approach, but this is one person who holds all of that knowledge and can cascade it to everybody.
And I think it might be important now to just very briefly mention compliancy and mention the EU AI Act and what you're seeing in your research as a global epidemic almost. What's going to happen globally for schools and how does that mimic GDPR? And I think that helps people understand more about our why and why we're creating these tools and these resources and courses for schools.
I think if we look at the pattern of behavior, what happened with GDPR, which was a data protection regulation, is that it affected any other situation where an EU citizen was interacting. So a company that was working in the EU or happened to have a customer in the EU, they also embraced these data protection regulations just to make seamless integration and to be able to work across different situations. We're seeing already that when the EU AI Act, which is quite stringent regulation, very much in favor of the citizens' privacy and engaging with a level of risk assessment, they've actually classified education as high risk, which initially, I know we've talked about this before, initially I was really shocked. I thought, well, schools, just schools, teaching, it's fine. We experiment all the time. But actually what they meant in a deeper sense was that education is key. If you block off an option, if you block off a access or admissions to students, then you are changing their life significantly. Mm-hmm. So the use of AI in grading or in behavior management or tracking, any of those things could be very risky. So it's interesting they've taken a very strong stance in that position. And we're already seeing that neighboring jurisdictions, Turkey, Switzerland, Norway, they're holding off to wait and see until the full implementation. And we know that they adopted elements of the GDPR. And then we know that the US, because it was such a significant market, also did the same. And we see that South Korea has moved early, but other countries are waiting to see. They're working on frameworks first, or they're working on guidelines first. But ultimately, we predict from that pattern that we saw from GDPR, there will be an impact. So for example, Saudi Arabia, they're already developing these ideas, and we know that it will end up in governance somehow. So the risks may be at different levels or the rules might be slightly different, but ultimately we'll see a common thread. And we can see that, like I say, in Switzerland, where they're effectively just going to adopt the EU AI Act, or Norway, where they're going to modify it slightly. So our neighbors are probably the first to watch, but then our next door neighbors and our other neighbors, they're going to adopt similar ideas. So if we can future-proof our schools with these good practices anyway, these are just best principles that we could apply to risk, to development, to safe innovation, which is really what we want. We don't want to avoid it, and we don't protect our students to the point of meaninglessness, but we do want the knowledge that what we're doing is within the rules, that it's defendable, and that if the situation changes, if anything changes, we haven't done harm to our students. We haven't exploited them. We haven't unintentionally. We know that human error is probably the biggest risk of anything with technology, but we want to protect them from any algorithmic influence and so on. But that requires as well, the EU AI Act has insisted that anyone who's a deployer of AI, that's every single user. So that's a school. If you're using AI at all, you will need to do AI literacy training for every staff member. And that's huge. That's a huge demand.
Using AI also means that your teachers are at home using AI or whatever AI apps are out there, or kids are at home. Yes, if you're not sure if your school's using AI, yes, it is. It is using AI.
Yes.
Right. So this really falls under every school. And I think when you talk about it, it does feel overwhelming, right? And I think as a school leader, it feels overwhelming. But I'm so happy that regulations are coming into place, right? We have to figure out ways to keep our kids safe and get this AI chaos a little bit more under control. That's a great transition too, to, what are the risks that IB schools specifically face? I think you've kind of covered that, right? What risks are they going to face if they don't take AI seriously right now?
Well, I think we have a risk to learning, right? You and I were talking to a lot of kind of DP coordinators who feel like they are fighting fire with this one. They have teachers who don't feel comfortable signing the academic integrity form. They have detection softwares that are unreliable. And so if you make an accusation against a student that may be founded or unfounded, what do you do next? What do the school leaders do to back you and the student up? So is it possible that we might see students losing their diploma? Is it possible that we see teachers being sued by parents? So those are some genuine risks. In Ireland, they've just started investigating immunity for teachers. So if an AI influenced piece of work somehow got past them, could they be liable for that work? Could their professional standards be undermined? So I think we'll see a lot more of those kind of conversations. We'll see a lot more of lower level risks. So might see societal risk for which schools are not responsible. We might see financial risk, which again comes down to the jurisdiction. Environmental risk, of course, we have this impact of the energy consumption, but really we also have a knowledge risk. How are we going to undermine or support what AI will do to learning? And I think that's a significant risk that we panic about a lot, but we don't necessarily work through. What does it do to the essential components of knowing? What does it do to our skills that our students need? So there's a significant risk across the board, which could be overwhelming. But the good news is good teaching and good learning will remain. And it's another tool that can be used in our arsenal, but a tool that has to be used wisely. A very sharp and insistent tool, but a tool nonetheless. And I think that's another thing that we need to remember, that the people promoting EdTech tools are the same people who are promoting AI tools. And is it in the interest of your school? Does it serve your IB programs? Does it help your teachers? Does it truly save time? All of these promises they make, we want to use our IB critical thinking all the time to make sure that we are using the absolute best.
Yeah. And are we worried just about saving time, or are we worried about actually enhancing the learning that's happening in our classrooms, right? And which question is more important to us right now? I think that covers a lot of sort of the pain points that IB schools are faced with. I mean, could you speak potentially to that? We talked to so many schools. We talked to over 100 schools in 3 days. We were totally exhausted. I think a lot of the pain points were, we don't know anything. There were a lot of schools in that sort of first tier of, we don't know. We haven't done any AI literacy training with our staff. We maybe have one tech integrator who is potentially trying to do the research on his own or her own and trying to do the implementation. What are some of the other pain points or stories that we've heard of now from schools that you could speak to?
Well, I think we've heard people in 3 kind of holding patterns, which is why we redesigned our kind of level 1, level 2, level 3 ideas. Is we hear a lot of schools said, well, we have a policy and we've done a session with the kids and we've put up posters. And that's kind of the end. And they're hoping for the best. And they're in a holding pattern. And they know they're in a holding pattern. And they also, many were super honest.
To be fair to those schools, though, they are doing their best. I mean, think about the role as a school leader. Oh my goodness, you're so busy. How can you do this on top of everything else? So yeah, we absolutely saw, schools in that sort of level 1, tier 1, whatever we're calling it. And then can you speak to the other 2 as well?
The next level up then is we saw people who were really going for it. They had a work group or a task force, or they had a working professional learning community. So they had set up a structure, but needed a direction. And I think that's another thing, is that because it's such a sprawl, and you might get passions, and you might have one person who really enjoys developing bots, but they have no safeguards. And you have somebody else whose responsibility it is for safeguarding, and they're saying, no, all the time. So you get a lot of that too. You get a lot of doomsayers, and that's probably what I would have been in the past. A lot of, don't touch it till we know how it works. Do you know, those kind of people. And that's kind of tier 2, where I think they're ready to have those ethics conversations. They're ready to think about sustainability. They only want conscious and important and significant use of AI. And that's where we can come in and we can fine tune their use cases. We can consider what's really going to work in terms of horizontal and vertical articulation, excuse me. And I think as well, that thing that you just said there really resonated with me, because do we want time saving, or are we just optimizing for the sake of optimizing? Because I do remember teaching before emails. That's how old I am. And the amount of marking and the amount of planning hasn't changed. The expectations have changed. The notifications have changed. Will AI help with those things? And I think you hear a lot of conversations like AI is taking away the things that humans really enjoy, like the writing and so on. And it's not helping us with the drudgery. So I think that's important. The final group, and it's a very small cohort, is that level 3.
I think there are 5 schools, right, that we've talked to in this group.
Maybe, and they're usually, and this is a classic inequity. They tend to be very resource rich schools. where they have the time and or the budget, and they have the interest, which is another thing. They have the interest and they have the wisdom in a few unique educators who have the time to go out and see what's there and then make value judgments. Because that's the other part. How do we know that we've done our compliance checks, that we've spoken to the vendor, that they're trustworthy? There was a school who we spoke to recently, and then on New Year's Eve, they were told that their data servers were shutting. That was it. They were just going broke. All of the data was going to be lost. We can probably transfer it to you, but sure, who's available on New Year's Eve? And all of that AI embedding they'd done into their lessons, totally useless. They have to transplant it somewhere else. And those of us who've moved from management software to management software know what that feels like. It's a nightmare on top of something that you thought you've just invested a lot of time in. So that tier 3 group tend to be very small, and they're very fortunate. And still they want to talk to us, because even with a dedicated person working on it full time, again, they want to know what's out there. What haven't they seen? What's coming down the tracks that they don't have the network to assess and identify? And that's really that's also significant. So there isn't a single level that we haven't seen needs with. Do you think? I mean, what were your takeaways from that? Like the standout concerns and the standout successes?
I think a lot of tier 3 schools, as maybe we shouldn't call them tier 3 schools, but a lot of schools in those third group that we're talking about that feel like they've figured it out. I think they don't realize that you maybe feel like you figured it out because you figured it out more than other schools, but there's so much technology that even just came out a couple months ago, right? Like AI operators and Manus, and just basically workflows for those of you. For those of you who are unaware, but really machines that we as humans are able to actually manage. So AI agents, where they're working at not just 1 or 2 tasks for you, but they are accomplishing 12 tasks in a row. Like, please go online and book my my flight and my trip to Greece, and ensure that all the restaurants are booked. Here's my card information, right? So that kind of crazy level. And so I think schools, yes, it's fantastic that they're feeling good about where they are. And yes, I'm sure they put a lot of energy into it. But my biggest question to them would be, okay, so how are you now utilizing this in a way that actually upskills your teachers, right? Are you utilizing this in a way that actually enhances pedagogy? Because we know what it's like to be in an IB school. You've got your true and true IB educators that have known the IB for 30 years, that are fantastic, fabulous, inquiry-based, concept-based teachers that are just killing it in their classrooms, right? But then you've got a lot of newcomers to the IB that don't know what they're doing. So how are you actually enhancing teaching and learning now within your school and enhancing pedagogy with these tools at hand? And so that's what we're also trying to do with some schools that come to us and say, we've got it figured out. Well, there's a lot more you can figure out. There's a lot more you can do, and you can be better still for your kids. And what can that look like? So that's kind of what we're doing in those schools. Yeah.
But I was going to say that you've kind of identified there one of the misconceptions, and probably the greatest misconception in certain schools, is that tool adoption equals AI implementation. And I think that's probably one of the biggest misconceptions that I've seen, is that if you're using AI, therefore you've mastered AI. And I think, or mistressed AI is the case maybe. And I think that that's really important, is that we say, okay, we're not looking at the immediate adoption. We're looking at what's next and what that does and what the impact is. And I think one of the questions I probably would ask you, we've talked so much about ATL skill development, you and I, and with the educators last week and stuff. What do you think? I know I've kind of thought about what the skills will evolve into, and we have a webinar coming up that we probably should plug as well. But my question for you is, what do you think is the importance of ATL skill development now in terms of replacing humans or working with AI? What do you think the future is? And then I'll jump in with mine as well.
And before I answer that too, you said something about tools. What's really driving me a little bit crazy is there are 20, 30, 40, 50 big influencers online who are just sharing a bunch of tools. Tools are only 10% of this conversation to be had. We need to be talking about ethics. We need to be talking about use. We need to be talking about safety, safe use. There's about teaching, about learning. There's so much more beyond, oh, look at this fun tool. There's hundreds of tools out there now for teachers, and they'll keep getting better. They'll keep innovating. But so that's my 2 cents on the tools. I'm sick of hearing about the tools. They all kind of do the same stuff. They're all fantastic, great, wonderful. It's funny to hear me say this because I'm such an enthusiast too. I was such an ed tech, try all the tools, do it all. The tools are great and they're there, but there's such a bigger, deeper conversation that schools need to be having with their leadership teams and need to be figuring out together. And one of the big important things is what skills matter most to our kids and what's going to be most important moving forward in those ATL skills. And I know that in your podcast on the IB Matters podcast with John Peterson, you mentioned number one, social skills. And I agree. Yes, number one, social skills. We won't get into them because that'll take us way too long. Social skills, critical thinking, those would be my top two. I personally, as a mom of two young kids, I always said I would rather have my kids learn and understand the ATL skills more than anything. And this was before AI. More than any content, I don't care about the subjects. It's horrible to say. I want my kids to be really well developed in all of the ATL skills. And so now, more than ever, I want that, with AI and with content running as freely as it is. Yeah. You wanted to add something, Rita?
Well, no, what you said there about something that I haven't really thought of before. I know we've mentioned it, that we haven't learned our lessons from social media and the impact it's had on our young people, and it's continuing to have. But also, I think that replacing human capabilities is, again, another misconception. It's not going to be about that. It's going to be about the value judgment, the understanding that if you take the human out of the loop and you don't have human expertise in there somewhere, whether it's judgment making or determining whether something is useful or absolute nonsense, then that's another misconception. I think you can have a platform that says it uses AI, and it does, but at no point has an IB educator had their fingers on it, had really thought, yes, this output is not mediocre. This output's really useful, and it's good because we see students and increasingly teachers just adopting whatever AI gives them in the interest of time saving or in the interest of efficiency. But we don't really, I think that's something that we really need to look at. So working on developing those ATLs across the board. And if I start, I'll never stop. So you have to cut me off there.
No, it's like. I know. Maybe we will do a podcast on this. I think for this podcast in general, we're really excited to invite a lot of schools in and see what are they doing to integrate? Are they using an AI workforce? Are they using an AI officer? And so, yes, we'll do something on ATL skills. We'll do something on everything, all things IB and AI. And we're excited to bring that to you. I want to do 3 more things, Rita. I really want to talk about a success story. I want to talk about some of the schools that we've worked with and how they're feeling. I'll start with that in a second. And then I want to talk about, because everyone keeps coming to us and asking us, you're two women in AI, in ed tech. So let's speak to that. And then let's talk about what we think about Eblana for the future as well. Okay, before we wrap up. So first, a success story. I'll share my opinion of one of the schools that we recently worked with. I think for me, you just feel that massive transformation, right? You feel like everybody's on different pages. Everybody's doing their own thing. You've got your enthusiasts over here. You've got people hiding. You've got people who don't even want to show up because they're so mad and they're so sick of talking about AI. You've got teachers all over the board and leadership teams too. Leadership teams all over the board. And I feel like there's just a really wonderful sense of unity and a sense of clarity and a sense of what do we value as a culture of learning in our school moving forward. And being able to define that as a school right now is so crucial. And that's the work, I think that's a big success that we're taking away from a lot of the schools that we're working with. They feel like, okay, we can do this. We all have an approach that makes sense. The administrators are supporting us when parents are maybe not being honest in their academics, and students and parents, right? And all of those difficult conversations. But I think for me, that's the success that I'm really seeing in schools. Is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I think it's really significant when you can almost hear the release of breath, like the tension leave when you discuss what is appropriate, what's not appropriate, where our guardrails should be, because it was such an open space and people panic when they need a little limitation. We want them to be on an island of exploration and discovery, not an entire globe. So I think that is for me probably the biggest success is when the school, you can feel the panic leave the room, and that's really incredible. It's a powerful moment. And we've had that in a couple of situations. We've had others where we're elevating practice, but that de-escalating panic, it does feature in a lot of the schools we've worked with.
And I think too, that a really big thing we've been seeing is people are requesting more courses. They're really excited about the depth that we've put into this professional learning. And a lot of schools are saying, hey, can you come back and let's all do level 2 now? Or can you come back in September and we'll do level 3? And so really seeing the potential of AI, but then understanding how can we, again, use it in an ethical, safe, sustainable way in our classrooms as teachers. But I also love this takeaway. And a lot of teachers keep coming up to me and say, oh, now I feel like I can model this for kids in a way that makes sense, right? I can actually model AI use in a way that I know is safe. I know I'm compliant. And I know I'm careful about, and I can teach kids that appropriately. And that's a lot of the work that we're doing too. Rita, tell me about, let's shift gears. Yeah.
I was going to say, because it can be intimidating. It's intimidating it's an intimidating arena where very quickly, very few people have put themselves forward as experts. And I think there's maybe a certain type of expert out there who's very good at self-promotion and very good at turning a little bit of knowledge into a lot of publicity. And I think that intimidated me at the beginning. I think that idea that until I realized that nobody was an AI expert, except for that very small group of people who've been working on it since the 70s, the rest of us are all playing catch up. And I think I was lucky to have dedicated research time and upskilling time. But it was really you that said to me, this is an intimidating sector for women. Why on earth would we be intimidated? It really, you've inspired me there, to be honest, because as a mathematician, as a physicist, why on earth would I be scared by other people who are just speaking more confidently than I am? And I think that was a real transition for me. That was a real journey that you took me on.
Yeah. And I went on it with you. I mean, yeah, it's exactly what you said. There were a lot of people who jumped into the space and went online and talked about tools. And that's great. But we felt intimidated by that, as women. And I think it's easier to be a female founder when you're doing it with another female. There's just something really special and really powerful about that. And kudos also to someone that sits on our advisory board named Dr. Nikki Sweeney. She is absolutely a rock star in this space and really, really going after gender rights and gender equality. And yes, we understand AI well and in a very deep researched, meaningful way. And we can do this too. And I think that's just the message as being a female founder and being women in ed tech. That I would love to share with the audience today. And it's fun. Once you get over that initial curve, it's fun.
I think having the bravery, having that courage and humility in equal measure to take a step forward, I think that's huge. If we look at people, like we have a ton of friends of Eblana who we work with closely and that we really value their leadership and their beyond. We have Nikki Sweeney, Elizabeth Malavidoff, Clara Hawking, Jenny Chang Wattle. All of these are friends of Eblana because we value that idea that people are collaborating, they're contributing to women's empowerment in tech. And I think we're in a really unusual space where DEIJ is under threat in certain areas. And we have a whole subculture of certain types of men who are intimidated by female empowerment. And I think it's really important. I was speaking to an IB former colleague the other day, and he said, listen, you might go crazy at me now, but maybe there was too much feminism. And I said, no, I think you're right. I think not that you're right, there was too much feminism, but I think that we need to live in a world where women can be empowered and without disempowering men. And I think that's really, the more of us that enter this space and are taken seriously and are making a really valuable contribution, that can lead to that equality that we're looking for. So I really hope that other women in education and or technology, because we're lucky to be both, right? We have tech and education brought together. I would love to see more people step into those leadership roles and, get in touch with us if that's something you're passionate about. We really want to build that network.
Yeah. Yeah. And we wanted to end the episode on a couple quick things. One of them was the biggest piece of advice. So right now, and I'll answer first, what would be that biggest piece of advice that we want to give IB leaders and IB teachers right now working around the globe that have some of the most incredible kids in their classroom? What advice are we going to give them around preparing for AI? And I was exchanging some emails with one of the schools that we're working with. And in the email, he said, it's time to act cohesively, right? Now is the time that we come together and we figure out what is it that we want to do? How are we going to go there? And why do we want to do this? Right. And this is a time where we have to come back together when it comes to AI. Is there any other advice that you would give, Rita, to the listeners?
I think it's similar to that in that we often hear as educators and school leaders, we are always hearing like, we need to move from surviving to thriving. But every
Hmm.
school we talk to was surviving. Every
Hmm.
single one, even those who are acting rather than reacting, they were just surviving at the moment. And I think what I would love is for us to retain that goal that we need to go back to human flourishing. And while it feels like you're fighting fires, that's really hard to do. So that instruction to act cohesively and to have a couple of those difficult conversations and to even have our AI skeptics, they're allowed to be AI skeptics. They can be a critical friend, but they need to be informed. You have to be an informed critical friend. So
Hmm.
having that cohesion in the staff, having a cohesion of vision, that's the single biggest piece of advice. Are you open to AI but cautious? Do you have a level of inbuilt trust in your staff? So that's really, really important. The enemy of the important is always the urgent, as I keep saying, and that's true.
Yeah.
Like urgent things will always grab your attention.
Hmm.
And just like we want the students to really have a much better attention regulation, we need to model that as teachers and as leaders.
Hmm.
If we can't direct our attention where it needs to go, why on earth would they? So I think
Hmm.
that's something that we really focus on in our courses. This is what's important. This is what you need to value. Everything else is just noise.
Yeah. And if to end things, if we could fast forward 5 years from now, so right now it's March 2025. So in March 2030, what do we hope AI in IB schools looks like? You've kind of mentioned it already, but
Yeah, but I
what's
think,
your hope for schools?
and again, I'm putting myself in the position of a school leader. It's so impossible to imagine what it will look like because how could you have imagined what technology in the classroom would have looked like 5 years earlier before widespread adoption? But I think for me, I think it would be a really clear articulation of how humans, AI, and knowledge or learning interplay. I think that would be really
Mhm.
nice to have a very shared understanding of best practice and the not the minimum knowledge level but the optimal knowledge level that interplays all of those things really carefully. We'll see on screen examinations developing in the diploma program, of course, and that will have a what is disgustingly called a positive backwash into classrooms. But I think it would be really interesting that if we could see the value of human knowledge and the application of AI efficacy
Mhm.
harmoniously, that would be fantastic. We see kids on screens, see kids off screens. We see them talking to one another, we see them thinking independently, and we see them making the best use cases of AI. That's how I'd like to see it. How would you like to see it? What would you like to see in 5 years?
Yeah, I always feel like, there's so many students that are sitting in the classroom that are a son or daughter or child of someone who works at a really big company that has a lot of power in the world, and that's an IB school. Those are the kinds of kids that make up IB schools. And I really hope that schools take the reins and they lead education into a much more positive future. That is my hope. I
Mm.
hope, and you mentioned it very briefly about humans and AI and knowledge. I hope that the thing that sits at the very top of all of this is the way that students interact with each other still, that it's humans and humans, and then the way that students still interact with themselves, and how they reflect, and all of those philosophies and practices that we love and hold dear to our hearts in the IB, that those things are still really, truly, strongly at the core of what we do in our pedagogy and in our classrooms.
And I think I would feel similarly, except to me, knowledge and learning is almost another person in that we
Yeah.
respect it for its own sake, that we protect it. You said protect earlier. That's really important, that we protect knowledge in the same way that we're trying to protect humans. And I think that's really important.
Wonderful. Okay, well, thanks everyone for listening in today. It was wonderful to have you here. We hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about what we do at Eblana Learning. If you want to reach out, you can go onto our website, eblanalearning.com, or you can send us an email at info@eblanalearning.com. We'd love to figure out how we can support your school, and getting you through sort of this AI storm that we keep mentioning. So wonderful to have everyone here today, and tune in for
Mm.
the next one. See you later.
Bye.